Hey, hello everybody. So this is our non-required but still hopefully informational lesson on Reconstruction. So I'm going to do the kind of in the corner box. Brought in my Civil War tie. Hopefully you're recognizing obviously Lincoln Confederacy, Lee, slavery, ironclads, things like that. So I'm just going to go to the PowerPoint and do my best to kind of explain things a little bit. And hopefully this helps out if you are feeling a little bit confused or just discombobulated. Let me go ahead and share the screen the way that I would like. Okay, so, well, that made it bigger, but okay. So when the South surrenders, everything doesn't go back to normal. We go through a time period known as Reconstruction, okay? And Reconstruction consists of really three different types of fixing the South. The first one, the physical. We had destroyed homes, bridges, farms, everything down there. Taken their railroads, and what they did was the few railroads the South had is the North heated up the railing, twisted it in like a pretzel, so when they tried to reheat it and use it again, it broke. So we really did a lot of number on the South physically. The most important probably is the mental and social. For many people's entire lives, they had been taught that blacks were less than them, that they were property, that they were not human. So to change this mentality isn't going to happen overnight. And as we're well aware of, if we pay attention to the news today, a lot of people are very racist and prejudice against different groups, and it goes back to even this time period. The third part is the political. We said that we had the federal government and the state government. Well, now the federal government will be supreme. We still have arguments about that, but nothing like the point of slavery or going to war over after this, and that's a big deal. Okay, so how can we go about these? The first thing created was the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau was a national federal organization to help the 4 million freed slaves. Remember, we just freed slaves, but didn't give them money, didn't give them land. Many of them did not have an education or an understanding of the language to the point of maybe getting certain positions or jobs. So what the federal government decided to do is put some funding into this Freedmen's Bureau. Now, this was not just for free blacks, but low-income whites. And this was fine and all, but like many, unfortunately, federally funded programs when we're trying to help people out, they don't get as much money. They don't last as long as they need to really make things work. But the Freedmen's Bureau is at least a step in the right direction. At the same time, we don't trust the South. As you can see on your screen, there are 5 different military districts where the Union forces, the military generals, actually rule over those areas until those areas of the South agree to the conditions of which the North or the United States is saying they have to hit to be readmitted into the country. So this was a yay, war's over, but you're still under military control. So for the South, it doesn't feel like the war is over. And yeah, for the Northern soldiers, for people in the North, okay, it's their taxes, but they're not seeing the battles in the North anymore. So once again, it's a perspective issue. The South is going to feel threatened. The North is like, okay, we're good. We just need to work through this. There were many different plans for Reconstruction. Lincoln wanted it real simple. You got to abolish slavery, but he said only 10%. I'm kind of circling it with the mouse the best I can do on this. That only 10% of the people had to swear loyalty to the U.S. 1 out of 10, and you can come back. Boy, that's being flexible. If we said you do 10% of your work and you pass to the next school year, ugh. Well, not saying Lincoln was wrong, but he wanted to get things solved. Andrew Johnson, his vice president, we'll get to why he has a plan, was a little bit more punitive or a little bit more requirements for the South to achieve. As you can see, even a couple years later, so 63, 65, 67, the plans, I mean, the war ends in 65, so there had been plans, but they're all over the place. The Republicans, which we'll talk about why they're known as radical, had the Reconstruction Act, which had a huge amount of requirements, much, much different than maybe Lincoln's plan. And a lot of this was the Republicans were known as radical because this party felt that the South was to blame for all the problems in the country because of going to war, the death, the loss of the economy, the cost, and everything. So they kind of wanted the South to have to pay for that. Reconstruction plans, I'm going to skip this because it's the same kind of thing. Unfortunately, as we know, Lincoln does not get to have his Reconstruction plan. In the bottom left-hand corner, you will see a picture of Lincoln attending Ford's Theater, a comedy. On that night, he is assassinated by an actor of the time, John Wilkes Booth. Many people are going, how could someone get that close to Lincoln? Well, the Secret Service wasn't like it is today. Also, John Wilkes Booth was a famous actor of the time period. So when he was walking backstage, people were like, oh, John Wilkes Booth. They didn't think anything of it. When, after he shoots Lincoln, he does jump off the balcony, breaks his leg, and he's able to get out because people thought it was part of the show. They didn't realize that Lincoln had been shot necessarily. They just thought it was part of the skit kind of thing. Booth is captured later, and there were some other possible, I don't want to go into National Treasure 2, the movie necessarily, but there were some other high-ranking government people who were on the hit list, unfortunately. This ends one of the greatest presidencies of all time because of being able to keep the country together, even though there's many things that Lincoln did that people do argue against. But the way he was able to keep his morals kept the nation together. With no Lincoln, it gets rough. The radical Republicans kind of take over because the vice president, Andrew Johnson, was only put on the presidential ticket to balance out Lincoln. Johnson was a Southerner, so he would balance out Lincoln. It might get more border states to stay in the country. It worked well for people. Well, the radical Republicans, as you can see, Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, their goal is to just destroy the old ways of the South. These rich white planters should not have the kind of control they did before the war. We want to make sure that freedmen, yeah, they're free, but are we protecting their rights? And also, by doing this, the Republicans would stay in power. So we have Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson, and this is, like I said, this is skimming through a lot of it. I know this video is probably going to be longer than I want, but we're going super fast. This should be a 2-week unit. Okay, Andrew Johnson takes over, and people do not like, at least in Congress, do not like what he does. He doesn't just automatically agree with them. He vetoes a lot of their bills. And eventually the Republicans go, Mr. Johnson, you are unfit for the presidency, and they put him into the trial for impeachment, as you can see throughout this. This impeachment trial is staggering. People do sell tickets, scalp tickets to come to the session. Andrew Johnson is not fully impeached. He does get to the trial. He is spared by 1 vote. Now, this would have been catastrophic for the democracy that we know of as the United States, because Johnson may not have been liked, and there's a lot of beliefs that he was truly racist with a lot of his decisions, but he didn't necessarily violate the Constitution. He just disagreed with the laws of Congress, and that's the goal of the 3 branches of government, of separation of powers, is to veto laws, and Republicans didn't like that. Had the Republicans at this time been able to impeach Andrew Johnson, we probably would be on our 300th president by now, because it would mean every single time a president and Congress disagree, Congress could get rid of that president. And that's not the idea of separation of powers. So Johnson stays on now. He has virtually no power after this, and we're going to just look to the next election. But it just shows how many different viewpoints and how many strong viewpoints we still have. We're supposed to be together. We're not together. During this time, 3 amendments are passed, and very controversial. They're not simple amendments here, but these are known as the Civil War amendments, and these are probably 3 of the most important in our nation's history. The 13th Amendment, that we cannot have slaves. We cannot have slaves. There's no slavery allowed in this country, and in the amendment, the words of the amendment, it says you cannot take away this amendment. So as long as the U.S. has the Constitution as our set of rules and laws, we cannot have slavery in this country. Now, many people would argue we found other ways to have slavery, maybe not where you actually own somebody. And that's a debate for high school or college or as you're older and really looking at economics and social strategies and things like that. The 14th Amendment, as it says in the picture, no state shall deny equal protection under the law. So it is citizenship to black men at this point. We still do not have rights going to women. That's a unfortunate situation. Doesn't happen until 1920, obviously. We talked about it earlier in the year with the women's rights movement. And we see the emphasis on giving former slaves, black men, opportunities, but not a lot of other people. So the 13th ends slavery. The 14th says everybody's a citizen. The 15th gives voting rights to black men. All three of these we could debate for hours. I had so many other activities for you, but it's a good start as to seeing what these, you'll cover these again at the high school. These will be brought back. Okay, so just a little bit to finish this up, okay? By the time we're in 1876, there's an election, and you're like, 1876, the war started in 1861. Yeah, it ends in 1865. We're 11 years later. There ends up being debate over who could win the election. And as it says, the short of it, Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden have an election. It's too close to tally regularly, so the House has to vote on it. The Republican candidate, Hayes, wins the election. And a lot of this is because he got Southern votes because he agreed to say, we're going to move the troops out of the South. We're going to end Reconstruction. Now, these kind of deals do happen all the time to get a lot of things done. It's not necessarily shady. It's just, political deals do happen. But because of Hayes' election, he gets the presidency, Republicans stay in power, but we're going to remove the troops from the South. Okay, and that's what just popped up at the bottom. We're almost done, guys. So, the New South. This is a sad picture. No smiles on my face, no anything. What the South chooses to do is not change their mentality. It's let's find ways. Yes, we can't abolish slavery, or we can't have slavery because that's a national law now, 13th Amendment. But let's find ways to get around it at the state level. So what do? Upper left-hand corner, things like a poll tax. All right, so a black man, you're allowed to vote, but in our state, you must pay to vote. Well, a lot of blacks did not have the money out of coming at slavery. But this was a negative because there were a lot of poor whites. So a way to restrict voting rights but not hurt the poor whites was something like a grandfather clause. If your grandfather could vote, you could vote. Well, no former slaves, no freedmen's grandfathers could vote, but a lot of poor whites could vote. There were a lot of ways that the South restricted the rights of blacks. All the pictures around the outside go to segregation, which is something you'll cover at the high school, so it jumps a little bit forward. The picture in the middle, I'd love to say no longer exists, but as of 2 weeks ago, there were people wearing these masks in public groceries in 2020. You see a group called the Ku Klux Klan or the KKK, a militant hate group. Today, if we use the same terms that we use for how other countries work, we would definitely say terrorist organization. Built in the South, very big groups of it in the North, though, with the white covers on their faces, meant to harass, murder, scare in any capacity, mainly African Americans, but they do go after Catholics and Jews as their evolution goes on. Famous for lynching people, and that would be hanging you from a noose on a tree, setting crosses on fire in yards, a very bad hate group. And a lot of this discrimination does still happen today. If there's anybody in the United States that says we don't have racism, then they either need to have their eyes opened or I don't know, because there is a significant amount of racism still in this country. It may never go away, but it's our job to keep our eyes open because we would want to be treated equally as someone else. I hope. So we should expect the same of someone else. Almost done. The New South. So we talked about how they didn't really change their mentality when it comes to racism towards blacks, but they do change after the war, the industries. So they don't become totally industrialized like in the North, but they do look at manufacturing more items. They look at what we call diversifying crops, adding different crops that they did not have before. Okay, transport the goods on their own, more railroads, more shipping, not depending on the North because it was such a negative for them during the war. And there are a lot of other ways that they get into this. I know you don't have your book anymore. You could look up, I mean, you could spend weeks researching things on on Reconstruction. This video does not do it justice. So at the bottom it says, did the South really change as a result of Civil War and Reconstruction? And we could say yes or no. All I'll say is these are some flags of states today. And you'll see that we have a lot of Confederate connections. We have a lot of the same colors, although we could argue that they're American flag colors too. The Confederate flag, which I did go over in one of the other videos, to many in the South is about freedom. That's an anti-American flag since it was a different country. That is as anti-American as you can get because it is the Confederate flag, and anybody in the United States now should be the U.S. flag. So there's a lot of debate about this flag and what it represents. Some people could definitely argue with me on that. Many people go, it's not about slavery, even though it's completely about slavery. And this is where, once again, symbolism, we've talked about a lot. It doesn't necessarily matter what it means to you. It's what it means to other people. There's things that I do in the classroom I don't even realize have a negative tone. There's sometimes I like to just stand there with my arms crossed. It's comfortable for me. But that's an image of like anger and frustration. So I have to catch myself and not do that, because even though it might be good for me, it might hurt the mentality of one of my students. And they might go, wait, he's upset even though he's smiling. Where's he at? I'm so confused. You got to be careful of those things. And it doesn't mean that your rights should change because of others. But the only way to have this whole freedom and rights and respect for other people is to have respect for other people. We can't just say my rights are more important than somebody else, or what we quote unquote stand for in democracy does fail. So that is the end of me going super quick through Reconstruction. I do hope that it helped if any of you were interested. There's no quiz, there's no nothing. I just wanted you to have the opportunity to see some things, and it was mainly pictures, which I think is very helpful. So I want to thank you and have a good day.